Ministry Training Series, Social Media and Electronic Communication. This webinar is for the 5th competency, which is about communicating with youth groups. And we're focusing really in on social media and electronic communication. In the future, we might focus on some of the other competencies or skills within that. My name is Bart Frost. I serve as Director of Youth and Young Adult Ministries here at our Unitarian Universalist Association. I'd like to welcome y'all. I'm a lifelong Unitarian Universalist. I've served as a Director of Religious Education in our congregation in New Orleans, and as well as in many other volunteer leadership roles throughout the years with the UUA.
Hi everyone, my name is Tim Atkins. I serve as the Director of Religious Education at the Morristown Unitarian Fellowship in Morristown, New Jersey. And I also serve as one of your UUA trustees. In my past, I also served as Director of Social Media for the All Online Church of the larger fellowship. I'm happy to be here.
So our opening reading today comes from one of our social media ministers, the Reverend Naomi King, who does the majority of her ministry online, as well as on Twitter primarily. And our reading is, "Awake every heart with love for this new day, love for this earth, love to make this life better." And you can find Reverend Naomi on Twitter at Rev Naomi, or you can find her chalice lightings at #ChaliceLight. So this is an opportunity for y'all to introduce yourselves in the chat box, so we know and you know who's in the room, in the virtual room with us today. Tim and I both introduced a little bit about ourselves, and so go on right ahead. If you could please say your name, maybe your role, and where you're from, that would be wonderful.
And just as a note, in the chat box, make sure you're sending it to everyone, not just the panelists.
Thank you, Tim. So today we'll be talking about social media and electronic communication. We'll be identifying 3 main points of interest and answering 3 questions. Why do we need to embrace social media? How can we promote safer practices using social media and electronic communication? And how do we move from announcements to ministry?
So let's talk about why we want to talk about social media in terms of communication. And I believe asking why we need to do social media is asking like why we should even communicate with youth outside of the youth group room. You know, we need to be where people are in their lives. We need to be relevant. We need to be there when they need us. And the way to do that is through social media. You know, in my old congregation in Atlanta, used to be our volunteer social media coordinator. And I did that because I could never make weeknight meetings because of my job. I worked 1 to 9:30. And so I missed a lot of congregational life outside Sunday mornings. So for me, doing my congregation social media was a way to keep that connection to my faith beyond just Sunday mornings. And if we are active on social media with our youth groups, it's a way to keep our youth engaged to our youth group and to our congregations beyond just your typical youth group time. I'll be saying Sunday morning because that's just personally when we have our youth group session. So you can substitute your time and date, you know, whenever you hear Sunday morning there. But it's important that we need to be there for our youth beyond Sunday morning, and how we do that is through social media primarily. And so this is why we talk about social media, why we're having this training focused on social media. When it comes to communicating with youth, especially outside Sunday mornings, it's done through social media. Social media is the means. Bart?
So we're going to go into Social Media 101 real quickly. This isn't going to be a comprehensive explanation of any of these platforms, and we will talk briefly about Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and some other apps or software that we think you should know about. So, you know, if you do have questions that are deeper around how to use these, you can direct them to us offline or in the chat box, and we'll get to that at the end. But right now, we're just going to present one common use and one way to elevate your ministry on this platform.
Yes,
So,
just to stress, we're not going to get into the mechanics of how to use these. We recommend, there's all sorts of YouTube videos, for example, and how the mechanics of posting, for example, would work on these different platforms. We're focused on how to use them with the social media and youth group lens.
Thanks, Tim, and take it away.
So first, Facebook. So the important thing to note is the difference between Facebook groups and Facebook pages. Facebook pages are for outside external communication. If you were going to advertise your youth group to the wider community of youth in your area, you would use a Facebook page. Probably you shouldn't be doing that so much. You want to be focused on Facebook groups. And most youth groups out there have a Facebook group. And I know we do at Morristown, for example. We use our Facebook group for really planning and planning events, planning outside Sunday morning events, planning social events, etc. And then also we occasionally try to post some discussion topics in there that reference what we have been talking about in the youth group the week prior or what we're going to be talking about in the week ahead. So that's kind of a standard way to use Facebook. And something I have done more and more as a religious professional is rely on Facebook to tell me when there is pastoral care needs in my congregation. You're going to have that happen with your youth as well. So you can use Facebook messages as a way to check in with your youth and a way to do pastoral care with your youth. Next, on Twitter. So I love Twitter. Twitter, if you treat Twitter like a conversation, you're going to be more successful on Twitter. And so one way, the kind of standard way we use Twitter is just to put out announcements about things, but that's not really a conversation or a discussion. It's just more broadcasting. So that's not the most effective way to use Twitter. You want to use Twitter to help make connections to your youth. So for example, I was at the United Nations Office Intergenerational Spring Seminar a couple of years ago. They had a hashtag and were encouraging us to live tweet. So naturally, I was live tweeting things. Well, a couple of my youth also were live tweeting things, and they ended up finding me on Twitter as a result. Now, I wasn't too scared about that because, my mom's on Twitter, so I'm not posting anything too radical on Twitter already. And so I wasn't afraid for my youth to find me on Twitter. But when they found me on Twitter, they thought that I was more a real person, that I had a stronger connection to them than just Tim in the DRE office. And so it's a way to really demystify who you are and to really build a stronger connection to the youth because they think it's awesome that they found you on Twitter and that you have genuine emotions and genuine thoughts just like they do. Now, a way that you can use Twitter also is prompts or questions. Now, this can be tied back to your youth group sessions, either the week before or the week ahead. Or if, for example, if you're doing theme-based ministry in your congregation. So let's say your theme for the month is renewal. Well, then you can ask questions or give prompts or short quotes about that theme of renewal that are targeted to your youth group. And then you can either mention the youth by Twitter handle or just broadcast it out. And a way to do that is also you can make use of the lists for your youth group. Bart, how about Instagram?
Yeah, so the next one is Instagram. So Instagram, I just want to put out there before I go in any deeper, that Instagram also has a set of unspoken etiquette and rules that go along with it. I'm not going to go into detail about those. I do recommend that you reach out to people around you that use Instagram more frequently for that. I myself am not an avid Instagram user, but the primary way that you might use Instagram in your congregation is to share beautiful, inspirational photos, to use a program like Canva or Spark by Adobe to match pictures with inspirational words and to put that out there for your people. One of the more innovative ways to use it would be to use themes and theme-based ministry in Instagram. You could give your youth group a photo scavenger hunt, much like the #YouLent project that's going on right now, where each day or each week you give them a theme and they have to post a picture to Instagram using the hashtag feature to post that. There's also Snapchat. Now, the primary way that our young people use Snapchat are to directly message one another, primarily through streaks. As I'm going to talk more in depth in safety, you don't want to do that. But I'll explain why. What you'll want to use Snapchat for are stories, and you'll want to make sure that your privacy is set to everyone, not just friends. And you can post a story is the photos stay open for 24 hours, and you can post, and they're in order. So when someone clicks on that, they'll see your first picture or your first video, and then it'll rotate through. It's a really great way to create a narrative about an event. Now, more innovative or uncommon way to use this that is actually more common amongst our cousins in other faiths is sharing behind the scenes, to share a snippet of choir rehearsal, or maybe a team, staff team prayer before worship begins, or maybe your youth are cooking for the pancake breakfast and you want to share just a snippet of that with everyone to give them kind of a hint of what the experience might be. We also have all of these other ones. Tim, would you like to talk about Tumblr?
So Tumblr, my old youth group in Atlanta, every one of our youth was on Tumblr. Tumblr is a short form blogging site. I like to call it a mix between WordPress, Instagram, and Twitter. You can do text-based posts, but those texts really should just be a couple of paragraphs long, no longer. There's a lot of images, a lot of memes come from Tumblr, etc. And so you can use Tumblr to help build that kind of internal sense of community, and also kind of broadcast out what you're doing with your youth group. I would say Tumblr probably appeals to your more artistic / geeky youth group members, and being Unitarian Universalists, you probably have a lot of artistic / geeky members of your youth group, because we're all a little geeky to be UUs. So you may have a youth group that has a lot of folks on Tumblr, and that might end up being where you want to go.
And there's also GroupMe and Remind 101. I'm going to talk about both of these at the same time because they're very similar platforms. So they're both either text messaging or chat-based platforms. So GroupMe is really good for creating a group chat, and you can create just a group for your people, and so that everyone can be in communication together, either throughout the week or at events, and share their ideas. You could use it to provoke conversation as well. Remind 101 was designed for teachers to communicate directly with students and parents. So that's a really great tool and very safe tool, because it's a one-way communication. You text out and they can't text back, or if they text back, it's logged. So it's a really great way to communicate with students, particularly around announcements. Hey, don't forget to bring your favorite reading to youth group next week. Things of that nature. Tim, do you want to go into YouTube?
So YouTube, odds are you have watched something on YouTube in the past couple of days. And so YouTube is a great video storing website. You don't often think of it too much in terms of social media, but this is a good place for you to post any kind of videos you do as a youth group. For example, in Atlanta, I challenged my youth group to make a video about why they like our UU youth group. And so it took them about a month from the planning to the filming to the editing. And they put together this great little promotional video about our youth group. And we put it up on YouTube, and it got a lot of notice. And so our youth loved that process because it engaged their creativity. And I liked it on the social media front because we were able to kind of put it out there about what youth group means to them. You can also use YouTube to come up with playlists about different themes. So if your theme, again, if you're doing theme-based ministry in your youth group, your theme is renewal, you could do a set of videos to all get into renewal, from music to meditation videos, on and on, or playlists of UU hymns that they can subscribe to. So there's plenty of ways you could use YouTube in your social media plan, but I would recommend it not be one of your primary. I would use it as a supplemental kind of social media platform.
And our office, the Office of Youth and Young Adult Ministries, does have a YouTube channel. So you can go to YouTube right now, and if you search Blue Boat Video, it should come up as when you do a channel search. If you search just videos, you'll just get a lot of videos about, usually with Blue Boat Home or about blue boats. But you can go there and check out some of the ways that we've created playlists, including identity and race-based affinity group resources, where we've compiled and a bunch of those. Slack is our last platform that we're going to talk about as in a 101. And Slack is kind of the new hot thing on the tech industry scene. And it's probably one of my new favorite programs to use. One of our Youth Caucus deans, Eric, introduced Jenica and myself to it. And I'm loving with the ways that it allows us to connect both formally and informally with the Youth Caucus staff team. You're able to create channels, and within channels, as you're having conversations, it's kind of like a chat room. And then you can create threads. So, you can go off on a tangent and still maintain a conversation. There's also a ton of apps linked into it that make it really fun and innovative to use.
When I do social media trainings, a question I'm often asked is, so what's next? What's the next big platform? I would say Slack is the next big platform. And
it's great for planning as well, because it lets you see and it lets you set deadlines as well. And we're going to talk about safety for a little bit. So a major part of social media as people that work with youth, we need to be able to balance confidentiality, safety concerns, and authenticity. And we're going to talk a little bit more about authenticity in a little bit, but I'm just going to tell you that if you're not being real on social media about who you are, then you might as well not be on social media, especially when it comes to working with youth. So we're going to talk about texting, Facebook, Snapchat, and the best safeties. First, we have texting. So texting is the primary way that not just our youth communicate, but most of us communicate now. It's easy, it's quick, and it's also, from a liability standpoint, not the safest way to communicate. So we recommend that to always use the rule of three, which, if you're not familiar with that, the rule of three is based off of safer congregations policies, some of which say there must always be 2 adults in a room, or never be alone with a youth, right? So to create a system where there's an expectation that, yes, youth can text you, but there's always going to be a third person on that. I recommend that person's your religious educator or your minister, and that it's communicated clearly to your youth, A, why you're doing this, but also what they'll be doing with it. Now, sometimes you can't control that all the time. You might get a pastoral care emergency and they might text you. What I would recommend then is taking a screenshot, and if you Google Android or iPhone or whatever your phone is, plus screenshot, you'll learn how to do that. It changes from platform to platform and phone to phone. But to take a screenshot, and you'll want to create a folder somewhere on your church's network, or with a staff person's computer that's a little bit more standard, that you can save those screenshots in. It's not just about protecting you, but it's also about creating space for youth to have safe spaces and to make sure that we're also protecting them.
So I am a DRE who has been CC'd on some of these kinds of text messages when an advisor and a youth were needing to do some pastoral care through text messages. And, I kept them, I did not interrupt, but it helped give my advisor a sense of security, not just for a safety reason, but also the confidence in that they were doing the right thing. And my advisor was a little hesitant at first, and then ended up really loving that she could do this through text message and CC me as the DRE on those text messages.
And a way to kind of instill this in the culture within your youth program would be to create a small group pastoral care model where there's always, and this isn't doable for everybody, but where there's, 2 adults and a couple youth, and you check in together as well. Facebook. So Facebook, first of all, I want to lift up that Facebook, for the most part, isn't used as much by our youth. And that's an entirely different webinar. But if you're interested in knowing why, you can find me at another time, or you can Facebook message me. Primarily, the way you're going to want to use Facebook, and the safest way to use Facebook, is through groups. And you'll want those groups to be closed. And you'll have to have some discussions with your youth group about who's involved in those groups. Are parents involved? Is the minister in that group? Are volunteers in that group? What's the use of that group? And that'll really determine the makeup of that group. You'll want it close because you won't want just random people joining your group, and you'll want to be able to maintain some privacy for pastoral care reasons. And that's the primary safe. It's pretty safe as long as you're keeping your conversations open and in public on the group, even if the group's closed. Now, Facebook Messenger is a little bit more difficult because it is a one-on-one instant messaging platform, and you can involve other people as well. So again, I always recommend the rule of three, but actually, just as we were prepping for this webinar, I received a Facebook message from a youth I've worked with who wanted a reference for a position that he's applying for. And my general practice when I receive an unsolicited Facebook message from a youth is to respond, please email me. Mostly that's because they tend to Facebook message me in the evenings or in the weekends. And if I don't handle the situation right then and there, I'll forget about it. But it's also to provide a different form of communication. Legally, I have to archive all my emails for work. They're subpoenable. So for me, asking them to email me works best. Now, that might not always be the case. We have two youth observers to the UA Board of Trustees, Andrea and Bailey. And sometimes I have to communicate with them, and they're not always the best at responding to emails. I love them to death, but email is not a platform that many of our youth use, as Jonah noted in the chat. So to Facebook message them, I generally get a response very quickly. I always include both of them, plus Jenica or the board member, one of the board members that works with them as well. Again, that group of three. And if you can't remember to always screenshot and save, and you shouldn't be deleting conversations with youth without screenshotting and saving them anyways, which can be clunky and difficult, but best practices require us to sometimes do things the hard way. Snapchat.
So just real quick part, with the messaging service, we often with youth use the Facebook Messenger as an instant messaging service. You can also look at different alternatives. And so I had, when I was a youth advisor, needed to do pastoral care, heavy pastoral care with the youth. And the youth wanted to do it through an instant messaging program. And so I talked with my youth coordinator, and we decided to use Google Messenger for that, because Google Messenger through Gmail auto logs all the conversations. And so I didn't have to worry about the screenshotting, for example. And so with the auto log, if there was something that was needed, for example, I could easily send it to the youth coordinator on staff, and it ended up working very well for us. And so you can, if you have a youth that you're going to need to do pastoral care with through some kind of instant messaging service, there are alternatives to Facebook Messenger that you can explore together with your youth, and figure out which one works best, because a lot of them do have an auto log feature, but it's just Facebook doesn't really.
Yes, thanks, Tim. So Snapchat is it's actually one of the most used app by 17 to 34-year-olds currently on the market. And Snapchat, when it first came out, was pretty controversial, and is still quite controversial for its ability to send messages that are automatically deleted after a set of time. Now, they're not actually automatically deleted, as we found out through server leaks and such. And you can also screenshot Snapchat photos. But you'll want to make sure that you never, and I'll repeat this, you never friend a youth on Snapchat. They can friend you, that is great. But once you friend them, that's when you get the ability to send pictures back and forth. And that opens up a huge can of worms for those of us that work with youth, because yes, those photos are deleted within a certain time frame, and you don't really have control over what someone sends you. So they might send you a photo that's inappropriate, or post something that's inappropriate on their own story, and that will create all sorts of issues as well. So you'll want to stick to stories, and remember that it's outward facing. You're using this as an outward facing tool. In terms of accountability, you'll want to make sure that either you're using one account for your entire team, or that you have ways to check in with your fellow staff members. The way Snapchat works is you cannot have multiple users logged into the same account. So you can pass the account from person to person, and then at the end of the day, check to see what they posted. We do this with our youth media volunteers. We have an account, we have a Snapchat account, and we have two passwords. We have an internal password, and we have a password that we give to our youth media volunteers. And we switch the second password frequently. And so we'll give them the password, we'll let them log in, and at the end of the day, Ted, our digital communications editor, will log in, and he'll download the entire day's post, because again, it's a 24-hour cycle. They're up for 24 hours. And that lets us know what the youth are posting on our account, and we can have conversations about, appropriateness if necessary, but it also lets the youth use it from their perspective, and that's way more efficient and effective than us trying to do something that we're not 100% best at, although some of us are better than others. So some other apps that you want to be careful of or use safety around. So GroupMe does have the ability, the youth could create a separate group just for themselves without any adults. I would really discourage them from doing that. While one-on-one youth conversations can be productive, or while small group youth conversations can be productive, it can also be a liability issue in terms of if they're having conversations that affect the larger group, or break into cliques or bullying, which we really try and encourage our kids not to do, but they are youth, and sometimes that happens. With Remind 101 is text-based. GroupMe's text-based as well, but it's also app-based. So you can either receive GroupMe as text, or you can use the app. Remind 101, probably one of the safest ways to communicate, but not the best way to create engagement. So if you're just doing announcements, I'd really recommend Remind 101, and it is text-based and it goes right to their phone, and you can include parents on that too, which we all know is important sometimes for getting responses or getting planning or other things done. And with Slack also gives you the ability to save and to archive. It's also chat-based, so it's out there, and as long as you're not having one-on-one conversations, you can always loop in a third or fourth person to those as well. So that's kind of a brief overview of safety. If you have any questions, please throw them into the chat box. We do have a period at the end of this webinar where we'll be answering questions, but Kim might also be able to answer the questions for you.
All right, so now that we've talked about why and then the safety procedures that you want to have in mind as you get started, let's actually talk about how to get started with youth groups on social media, sorry. So I've got 3 general steps that we're going to talk about. Step 1, what platform? Step 2, why? And step 3, messaging. So what platform? Often Bart, go ahead and do the next slide. So often you want to think about, it's typical to say you want to figure out why you want to use social media before you decide what platform. And I'm telling you, you want to decide what platform first, because that's going to impact everything else you do. And so how do you decide what platform? You actually need to caucus and survey your youth, because each youth group, each part of the country, even part of your city has different social media platforms that dominate their schools. In Atlanta, every one of my youth was on Tumblr. In Morristown, none of my youth are on Tumblr. And so You want to figure out which social media platform is best for your youth group first. And then that's how you decide what platforms you should be on. So after you've done what platform, you need to think about why. Why are you on social media? Is it just for announcements? If so, you're going to focus more on text messages probably, and like a group me thing that sends out broadcast messages. Are you doing it to help reinforce what you're talking about in youth group? Then you're going to want a platform where you can send out inspirational messages. Are you wanting to do pastoral care? If so, then that's going to impact how you use, like I imagine pastoral care through Instagram would be pretty difficult to do, for example, but it's going to be a lot easier to do on Twitter, Facebook Messenger, and whatnot. And so the limitations of the platform are going to help influence why you're on social media. And then once you have that platform limitations in mind, you want to come up with what's your plan. What kinds of messages are you wanting to send out on social media? So you want to brainstorm why. And then you want to make your messages memorable. So social media, we are up against people who, one, do social media for a living, have degrees in marketing, have studied the science and the psychology and the sociology of how you get messages so they can buy stuff, right? We're up against advertisers for a living. And we need to make our messages at least somewhat memorable so we can stand out from that crowd of messages our youth are getting 24/7. So how do we make our messages memorable? I want to talk about this process from the book Think Orange. The Think Orange is a philosophy of religious education that originated at North Point Community Church in the Alpharetta, Georgia area. And it's a big evangelical megachurch. I love this book, Think Orange, and this philosophy. We've been implementing a lot of it in Morristown. But they have this process for messaging that I want to talk about. So it's say less, say what matters, say it clear, don't say it, and say it louder. So let's talk about each of these. Say less. What are you going to say? Simplify it down to the biggest concept. Simplify what you need to communicate to just the biggest concept. So let's take it for an example as we go through this. The idea, let's say our theme for the month is on renewal. And in the last youth group session, you talked about the benefits of meditation and did like a sample guided meditation and really taught about meditation. And so you want to reinforce that concept during the week. So say less. Say what matters. What's that one sentence that talks about why meditation is important? Let's say meditation is important so we can refocus on what's important. Maybe that's kind of that simplified biggest concept you want to talk about. So say less. Say what matters. Why are you going to say it? Pre-decide your content on the basis of relevance. Is this really helpful or relevant to their season of life? If I had to pick one word that I wish all of our religious education and youth programs focused on right now, it would be relevance. How are we relevant to the lives of our children, youth, and adults? And so this is Say What Matters, gets into that question of relevance. How is our youth group and our Unitarian Universalist message relevant to the day-to-day lives of our youth? So using our example of meditation, it could be, so let's say you had a bad day or had you got a bad grade on a quiz, on a pop quiz that you had today. Well, meditation is a good way to let go of the frustration over the bad grade and to come back to what's important, trying your best. That's how you could take that message of meditation and make it relevant to their season of life. So third, say it clearer. How are you going to say it? Craft words that capture the power of the principle. So if you've ever been to a General Assembly plenary / general session, you know the Unitarian Universalist love of wordsmithing and wordsmithing big documents. This is your chance to wordsmith small, short sentences to make them the most memorable possible. Try to have an interesting hook. Try to have interesting wording that will really draw their attention. You want to craft words that really capture the power of the principle. So for my example of meditation, it could be, remember to meditate, because you got the M sound that repeats often. I would spend, after I've got the what I want to say and then how to make it relevant, I would write out at least 4 or 5 different ways of saying the same thing and pick the one that really sticks in my head the most before I put it out on social media. So the fourth step is don't say it. And this isn't the world's easiest to do on social media, but it's a general messaging principle for our youth is what is the best way not to say it? Create an experience so the message can be processed. I would say this can best be done through things like Snapchat and through Instagram, where you have a video or a image that can be an image that really focuses on the point that you're trying to make. So for example, for meditation, it could be a nice calming meditative image. I once did this whole guided meditation using a fractal. And so I could send out images of fractals to our youth to just remind them back to the fractal meditation we had done. Or maybe I find a guided meditation on YouTube somewhere and send that out. So it's an experience rather than me just saying, hey, you should meditate more. That's what don't say it means. And finally, say it louder. Where else can you say it? You want to leverage every possible environment to reinforce each concept. So for this, how is your messaging across different social media platforms consistent around this same theme? How is what you're talking about on youth group Sunday morning or Sunday evening? How are you reinforcing the messages on social media on those youth group sessions? How is your overall congregational social media for the parents and adults reinforcing the messages you're sending to your youth? You want to have a cohesive, comprehensive social media strategy there so they're getting the same message in different ways throughout the week. And that's the whole say it louder part. So once again, I'll just recap those 5 different things. We have say less. What are you going to say? Simplify what you need to communicate the biggest concept. Say what matters. Why are you going to say it? Pre-decide your content on the basis of relevance. Is it really helpful or relevant to their season of life? Say it clear. How are you going to say it? Craft words that capture the power of the principle. Don't say it. What is the best way to not say it? Create an experience so the message can be processed. And say it louder. Where else can you say it? Leverage every possible environment to reinforce each concept. Now, in the resources, there is going to be a link to a blog from Orange Leaders that gets a little bit into this messaging. And if you really want to go more in depth, I recommend the Think Orange material. They have a great book and workbook that you can work through some of this stuff with. And finally, I want to talk about taglines, hooks, and relevance, and authenticity, which we forgot to add on this bullet point. So when I was the social media coordinator for Atlanta, I got to experiment a lot with taglines. And I would ask some of my fellow congregants what their tagline for Unitarian Universalism would be. We like to always talk about what's your elevator speech for Unitarian Universalism, and then I would push them to come up with what's a 5-word or less tagline for Unitarian Universalism, which is like elevator speech 2.0. And this is something that you could actually ask your youth to come up with on some Sunday morning. What is their best tagline for Unitarian Universalism? Then even if you wanted, you could do a little informal vote in your youth group, and then you could see which one the youth group likes best, and then that's the tagline that you could use on social media, for example, and start your own hashtag with it. So that'd be a way to get your youth group involved with this whole tagline process. In Atlanta, I ended up sticking to a tagline, love without exceptions, because I tended to get the most shares with that tagline on it, and it just really spoke to me about what Unitarian Universalism means. So you want to come up with that tagline for your social media post because it's a way to identify it's coming from your youth group, and it's a way to broadcast our you message out to the greater world. Because Unitarian Universalism can be pretty wonky to explain. Hooks. Once again, you want your messages to be memorable, and you want the best hook into that message. How are you getting their attention when there are 18 other Snapchat stories waiting to be viewed? What is that hook in? You want your messages to be relevant. Really, I can't stress relevance enough. How is the message relevant to what they're actually going through during the week? And then finally, authenticity. You know, I've seen research that shows that people are now choosing churches based off the authenticity of the minister rather than the theology of the minister. And so, how are you being authentic to who you are and showing your vulnerability in an appropriate way for a youth group? And so, you need to be authentic. Now, if it is not authentic for you to be leading a Snapchat tour of the building you're in, then don't do it. Ask someone else to do it, or come up with a different way of sending that message. Because youth are the best among us at sniffing out when we're being inauthentic, both on social media and in person. I'm sure you've experienced it in person before. I shouldn't say that word on a webinar. Their BS alarms and BS radars are very, very good when it comes to checking out for inauthentic messages on social media. They've been trained very well to do this, and we have to make sure that we are being authentic so they don't tune us out. So Bart, do you have anything you want to add about the relevance of authenticity?
So I have two stories I'd like to share. So one story comes from, I was creating an image to promote our youth media volunteer position at General Assembly. And I was including all sorts of slang and emojis that the youth use, as well as some other slang from other eras, to kind of show how out of date I was. I was trying to use the slang inappropriately, specifically. And I used the phrase "on fleek," which is comes out of the African American vernacular, and is slang that was a certain point in time, and means on point. On fleek is on point, and I included that. And I have a personal practice of always double checking with both my staff team and youth leaders and some adult leaders to make sure that the messaging is getting across. And the feedback I got was, on fleek doesn't seem like the right word to use. It seems a little bit culturally insensitive, or maybe even appropriation, especially because it's coming from the institution, which is a primarily white institution. And I heard that feedback and I took it, and I made sure to make the image even more goofy and remove the on fleek to make sure that my point was getting across, that I'm not using this language correctly. I need y'all's help to do it. So that's one way about maintaining authenticity and relevance. The other way, I'm going to lift up Sam, who's on this chat right now. So Sam Wilson's one of the few directors of youth ministry and congregations I know that are using Snapchat as a part of their ministry. And I see what Sam posts on Facebook occasionally, because he takes screenshots and posts them. And Sam has this really unique way that works for him. It might not work for everybody. So y'all know how the youth say lit. They mean it, lit is used in place of cool or awesome or dope, or if you might have used groovy back in the day maybe. So the kids say things are lit. Well, Sam turned it into a hashtag. So he says, and my understanding is it's now a call and response amongst his youth group, where whenever anyone says lit, he says like a chalice. So he'll post things on Snapchat or on Instagram that have the fire emoji plus hashtag like a chalice, which I think is just a really great way of using it. Now that might not work for everybody. Sam is a unique individual. He brings his own stash of glitter to General Assembly every year. So something like that might not work for me, because I represent the institution of Unitarian Universalism. I'm the director of Youth and Young Adult Ministries. So I need to be authentic in different ways. But Sam's able to connect really well with his youth on Snapchat through this. So you want to be relevant, and you want to use it. And like I mentioned under the safety section, if you have questions about how you can be relevant, you should let the youth take over. So I've at the United Nations office spring seminar last spring, Andrea Briscoe, who's one of our youth observers to the board, as well as was serving as senior dean to the youth caucus, was there. And I was just exploring Snapchat as a medium. And I had failed at posting a tour of the UA. I forgot to change the privacy settings. Essentially, I gave a tour to myself. And so I gave my phone to Andrea after texting friends and families, being like, don't text me for the next hour. Youth has my phone. And I let Andrea log into the Snapchat. We set boundaries around please don't access other parts of my phone. And I just let Andrea use Snapchat as she would use Snapchat. And what it turned out was a really great way for me to see how youth are using it to communicate with each other. Yes, they posted goofy stuff, but they also posted some really insightful stuff and some and perspectives and angles that I hadn't seen or hadn't thought about. That does require a huge level of trust to do that, but you could also set up other ways, like I mentioned before, by having a single youth group or church Snapchat where you can have a password that you can give out as well. So we are now at the time for questions. So I know some questions have been popping up in the chat box, and I know Kim's been answering some of them and has tabled some other ones, but we want to know, what does this bring up for you and what questions do you have? We're here to help and to assist and looking to answer them. So please throw them into the chat box.
So while people are typing, there are a few questions that came up that I could not answer. So Bart and Tim, I'm hoping you might be able to. Can Snapchat automatically archive stories for you, or do you have to do it manually every day?
So Snapchat does not archive stories. They don't want to archive anything. The Snapchat is kind of like a Polaroid. It's disposable. It's supposed to be disposable. So you'll have to download it every day. And that's an issue for some folks. The way it downloads is also difficult to use for other things. You'll need to be pretty adept at photo editors and video editors to turn it into something usable. We have someone in our office that does that. You might have someone in your youth group that's able to isolate single frames and such like that, but it does not archive automatically.
And how long is too long for a video that youth will generally watch?
Tim, do you want to take this one?
It's tough to answer this question because content in the video matters a lot. If you have one person standing and staring into the camera and just, doing a sermon or a homily on camera in a 101 just like this, it can't be that long. But if you're going to have something with music in the background, if you're cutting to different images, it can be longer. So part of it really depends on the content of the video and what you've got going on, both who's speaking, how many people are speaking, and what else is going on in the background. So it's tough to answer how long. I could say, if you want a rule of thumb, definitely not longer than like 2 to 3 minutes.
And if you can get it shorter, go shorter. If you can do it in 30 seconds, that might be the only time that, a lot of folks give videos 30 seconds to get to the point or to engage them and then exit out. That's actually an analytic that YouTube has given out. And I live that in my life. If I'm scrolling through an article and I see a video, I'll watch it for about 30 seconds and click away. So that's just something to keep in mind. It's hard to be concise.
Sorry, just a question. What about Vine? I believe Vine is done.
It doesn't exist anymore.
Yeah, Vine's gone. Twitter disbanded it.
But Vine's a good example. Vines are 6-second loops. So that's 6 seconds of video. That's not a lot of time. And yet Vine was hugely popular because it was these quick things that didn't take up your time or your attention.
Andrea said that her youth have mentioned wanting to create a youth group Instagram account. She can imagine a lot of pros for that. Do you have any cons?
I want to ask what why do they want an Instagram account? And I can see some really great ways of using it. Technically, this would be what the youth call a Finsta, which is a fake Instagram or a fake account. I think that the cons would probably be in use. So I'd want to, I'd have to go in depth, and I'd have to see a picture. I could see a model where someone is required, you pass around the Instagram account and they take a photo a day of, something that inspired them. And then at the end of, on youth group on Sunday, they present about that, which everyone saw and liked and maybe commented on. But I could see that not going well. I can see, that some of our youth and some of our adults don't have good boundaries and might post something that's inappropriate. And that could also be a learning opportunity.
So I think that you would want to have, for example, if they, with comments, make sure they're signing comments, and try to sign posts with which member of the youth group is making that post. So there is that accountability aspect. And for safety reasons, you need to make sure an advisor and you as the DRE also have the administrative access to the account as well, just in case.
So Andrea, I noticed in the chat you said that they want to show off how awesome youth group is. And, my question would be, that's probably really easy to do with video, but as someone who has a ton of photos on our server of youth sitting around in circles on couches or cross-legged or whatever, that they're not the most engaging photos. So I think I'd want it linked to like a theme or a ministry project or something beyond that. But maybe your youth have a more creative idea, or maybe your youth group is more than just sitting in a circle.
And I'm going to go ahead and answer the other question I see for me about friending youth on Facebook. And this is a broader point about how adding youth on Facebook or any social media platform. Whereas there are power dynamics at play here. You should never proactively add youth on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, whatever. If youth add you first, then it's a question of whether you can reply or not, whether you can accept the ad or not. So I have chosen that if any congregant, including youth, adds me on Facebook, that I will accept. If it is someone under 18, I send the parent a message saying to let you know your youth has added me on Facebook. I once did that, and the parent was like, "Oh, I'm unaware my child had a Facebook account." So I see Kimberly trying not to laugh at that one. And then I once got a request from someone who was in the 3rd grade. And I was like, so your 3rd grader has a Facebook account, and they're probably not supposed to. So I always let the parent know when a youth has added me on Facebook. And most of the time, the parent already knows they've added me on Facebook. And they're often happy that the youth is reaching out to me on Facebook as their DRB or youth advisor. But I always am not the one who adds people on Facebook. They have to add me first. Things like that on every social media platform.
And my circumstance is a little bit different. I don't add youth. I don't, well, I do. I'll accept friend requests, but I don't search them out. But I also make it a practice that my Facebook posts are actually 100% public. It means I get a lot of spammy friend requests, but it also provides accountability, unless I'm hiding like my partner from a post for some reason. But otherwise, I make all of my posts public. I do have a general practice of unfollowing youth. But I work with youth in a very different context than most of y'all. I work with them on large projects, year-long projects, and not, day-to-day pastoral care or day-to-day, every Sunday. So it's a different context as well.
If you are worried, you can set up lists in Facebook and set posts to be private. Again, I only post on social media what I expect my mom to read. And so I'm not posting anything on social media that's too deeply personal, frankly. I just don't use social media that way anymore. Mm-hmm. So I don't have to censor myself. So I do all my public posts public. But if you are using social media personally in a way that is very for private reasons, you're going to want to set up some controls on who can see what kind of post you make.
And Facebook makes that easy.
So Derby asked, with regard to safety, why would we treat text-only communication like a face-to-face meeting, meaning the rule of three, rather than like a telephone conversation, which would typically be between two people?
It's a good question. So our practice within our office is not to have one-on-one phone conversations with youth unless someone else is present on our end, or we record the call. And that's for safety reasons, so that, and here at the UUA, my staff knows that if they hear there's levels of confidentiality, but we are, they are expected to maintain confidentiality, but also they know that if they think I'm saying something inappropriate, that they should either call me out on it or go to my boss. I really would discourage from phone communications. And I imagine my experience trying to get youth on phones is relatively difficult. But I think that instead of phone communications, what I would actually do is probably a Zoom call or a Skype call and record it. That would be the best way. Otherwise, texting, it's a relatively informal communication structure. So phone calls are vastly more formal. Texting allows people to say just what they feel in the moment, which might be inappropriate. It also lacks context. So what you might say something over the phone that, if you wrote it down, could come across as inappropriate. So you'd want to, there's boundaries there, and I think that's the boundary that I would set for myself.
And I think that's all we have for questions right now.
I thought I think Sam had a question about friending Snapchat parents. Yeah. Do you think it's okay to accept Snap requests from parents on your youth group account? So I think so the first thing you need to know is you can accept friend requests and they'll be able to see what you post. No, we don't do any friend requests. I'd say no. And I'd question, Sam, what I would do is I would ask. I'd ask them why they wanted to be friends on Snapchat. I can't think of a reason why a parent would need to communicate with a youth advisor or a DRE through Snapchat that they couldn't send you a text. So that would be my question. And Sam, is that another question about friending parents and alumni over 18?
I want to bring up the broader point of alumni real quick because this popped up in our last call as well. So a lot of congregations will have a Facebook group for their youth group. You need to think about what you do when people bridge out of youth group. Do you kick them out of the youth group? What do you do? So one way to get around this is to have a different Facebook group for each year of your youth group. Now, you will lose some institutional memory that way, yes, but it's a way to make sure that just members of the current youth group are the ones in the group, and there's not, any former members of the youth group or any bridged out members of the youth group. So it's something that you need to think about and be cognizant of when you're setting up Facebook groups for your youth groups. And also, you want to think about the covenant. How does the covenant in the youth room apply in all social media practices as well?
And the way some folks have handled that, like on the last webinar, one of the religious educators creates a new Facebook group for every year. So every year gets its own Facebook group. Another congregation might have a youth group Facebook group and an alumni Facebook group. And to kind of hit on that too, on the over 18, I'd still want to maintain boundaries. I think mentorship of our young adults is very important, but I think that also maintaining boundaries, and while recognizing that relationships change as people grow and mature, that there's also power over. in this situation.
Bart and Tim, do you know any other places aside from talking to youth to kind of learn about the basics of Snapchat?
Yeah, so we have 2 Blue Boat posts, which are in the resource list that will be sent out. One, if you Google UUA Blue Boat Snapchat, you'll probably get them both, but one is 5 ways to use Snapchat in your congregation. And then the other one, we actually got sent by a social media company, a nonprofit who uses it for justice work. And so that one's called Snapchat Me a Movement, which might provide some ideas as well.
I think we're good on questions.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you all for your questions. These were really good ones, and definitely let us go deep into some of the theory behind it as well. And you can also, so the UUA does have, we have our internal safety and inclusion guidelines. They are available on uua.org. They're a recommendation for congregations or a suggestion, but not this is what you must do for our congregations, because every congregation has different legal requirements and every state has different legal liabilities. But you can find ours, and that'll be on the resource list as well. And a lot of our theory, or a lot of what we're talking about today, comes from that list. And I want to lift up that it is hard and it is a little bit clunky, but in the interest of being transparent with our youth and creating safe spaces, we really are called as religious educators to do the work.
And there's one final thing I also want to mention, is that there is a I've talked with several colleagues who have this fear of social media because it's just another thing that needs to get worked into their schedule, and 2, it may not be, you may not have grown up with social media, and so it seems like a foreign environment to you. So I want to tell you to use that exploration hat and just explore and have fun with social media, and to jump in with both feet, trial and error, and just give it a go, and go with, reckless, wild abandon. And that's how I ended up learning how to use social media, and how I learned how to use social media best in religious settings was just trying it out with a couple of colleagues and a couple of friends, just saying, hey, what can we do? How can we use this platform for churchy kind of things? So put on that experimentation hat, that exploration hat, and just don't think you need to be perfect all at once, because you don't need to be. Just give it a go, give it your best, and try. So we came up with a few discussion and reflection questions for you. I'm going to read these out loud, and you can see them on the screen, and you're going to get these. So the first is to use that think orange or find the message process to really plan out a messaging plan from something last month in your youth group and something next month in your youth group. Go through those 5 steps and try to keep refining your message into how you would do a messaging plan, a messaging calendar around something from last month and next month. Number 2, what social media platforms are most natural for you to use? What about your youth? What do those differences and similarities mean for your work as a youth advisor or religious educator? And how can you engage in that holy wonder work I just talked about new platforms and techniques for communicating? Number 3, go through your list of common ways you communicate with youth via electronic means already, and how are you implementing best safety practices in those communications, what needs to change, and how will you make it happen? So 3 big discussion and reflection questions for you to ponder over the next week or 2.
So resources for safety, you might want to, you should check out our youth safety and inclusion guidelines, that document. If you're looking for general social media awareness, Peter Bowden, who runs the UU Planet site, is one of our social media gurus. within our association. This is not lifting him up for any specific reason, but just because he's one of the people out there doing it. And he's actually also doing a course on social media for churches right now, I believe. On the resource list, you'll also see a how to tweet guide from Peter from GA. And just a reminder that hashtag UUAGA is how you follow all the happenings going on at Twitter about GA. If you're interested in ways to use Instagram, Tandy Rogers, Pacific Western Region Congregational Life staff, just posted a blog post on that, on how to use Instagram in your congregations. And there's also resources about Snapchat on there, the Think Orange. But I also encourage you to kind of think outside of the box and to put on your translation cap and go to some Christian youth ministry sources as well. Some of them are really horrible and not the, their theology is different than ours, not horrible. I wish I could take that back. And some of them are great. That's how I got into Snapchat and figured out some ways to use Snapchat in our congregations, was based on how some of the mega churches are using it. So there's that. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to send me an email at bfrost@uua.org, or to reach out to your congregational life staff person, or to reach out to your Laredo cluster. So as we get into next steps, that's something I'd like to encourage you to do, is to explore social media platforms, use these discussion and reflection questions, but also to reach out to your neighboring religious educators and youth advisors and other congregations and ministers to see how they're using it. And you might want to have a conversation with your congregation's communication team or with your staff team about how you're using social media. And then have a conversation with your youth about how they would like you to use social media with them. Tim, do you have any additional next steps for our peoples?
Go out, give it a go, and go for it. Just try and see in your first step. Remember, is to talk to your youth group about what platforms they're on. And that could be your guidance into what research and what platforms you need to learn about.
So our closing also comes from the Reverend Naomi King. And you can find her closing, her chalice closings, by using hashtag #ChaliceOut. Wisdom, help us cherish each day and the gifts we have to give and the gifts we've received. So thank you, friends. This is your Youth Ministry Roundtable. We extend our gratitude to all of you, and thank you, Tim, for being a part of this. If you have any other questions, please let us know, especially if you have anything you'd like us to go deeper in next year. And don't forget to like and subscribe Blue Boat Video on YouTube, and follow all of the various UUA Facebook and other channels. Sam mentioned adding me on Facebook. You can always do that. You don't have to. But you can also follow UU Youth Ministry on Facebook, and we're Blue Boats on Twitter, as well as our office. The Blue Boat Twitter is more editorial and comments on things that affect us, and the office is a little bit more us. And don't forget to also check out the Social Media Lab on Facebook. There's a lot of different labs, kind of, experimental Facebook groups for Unitarian Universalists. Check that one out if you need some ideas or you have questions as well. Thanks, friends. And the next webinar will be Youth Inclusive Multi-Generational Congregations, April 11th at 1 p.m. and April 13th at 8 p.m. And your presenters for that, I believe, will be Kim and Natalie. So thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful day.